So today's session is building research networks, and Cindy's going to give an introduction, but just so you know, the format today is going to be a bit different. We're going to kind of lay the groundwork for what research networks could be, might be. We have 3 guest speakers, discussers. They're just going to present their scenario. It's not going to be a real formal presentation, so they're here for you to ask questions. And I will let them introduce themselves when they come up here. We're going to make them sit in the front after some. So please ask questions. This is an informal gathering, and we really encourage participation, and we want folks to be engaged. So, Cindy, do you want to go ahead?
So we wanted to just, like Penny said, talk about building research networks and how you can build communications to make your research successful. These are our objectives for today, and really just to describe what a research network is. And so there are many definitions, actually, depending on what type of research you do and what area you're in, but sometimes it's just considered an institution without walls, so kind of as an abstract network or gathering of colleagues, a group of researchers, institutions, or staff working collaboratively to examine a problem and identify solutions. It could be a coordinating center or a central unit that oversees a study and having multiple other institutions underneath it. It can be funded or unfunded. It can be interdisciplinary, but it really should be collaborative, and that's what we wanted to really strive for. Collaborative research, it provides a unique opportunity for partnerships and collaborations, and it's especially useful, especially in this time, if you have limited finances, resources, staffing, even education or training, and then if you have limited services that you can provide. By working together within a network, you might be able to offer those. Building relationships, it's important. By forming synergistic working relationships, you can have successful research. So all members can contribute to the team. There's this exchange of information which can be beneficial for all parties. You engage professional providers, researchers, community members in your research. You can build trust among your team, which can then build trust among sites and community. And then you gain a respect for each other's competencies and what you can do and how you can help each other be more successful. There are a lot of responsibilities within a network. It's not, you have the PI and the PI's responsibilities, but within the network you have a lot of those same responsibilities. So management of regulatory, clinical processes. If it's a study that's using drug or device, you have that type of management. Database management, assuring good data collection, central lab if you're using it, oversight, which is key. It's critical to the success of the study and the network. Safety oversight, if you're looking at pharmacokinetics or laboratory sampling, then you have that type of management. And then assuring all sites are compliant, so making sure that everybody at all the other sites or all the other areas you're working with are following everything that needs to be followed, following those guidelines. There are challenges. So anytime you're collaborating with people, you have different personalities. You might have different goals and objectives that you want to accomplish. Sometimes you can have unclear expectations. You can have cultural differences. And then a lot of times, especially working outside of your institution or even within your institution, people might have a limited time, resources, education, training, some of those things we talked about earlier. So just for ideas for overcoming challenges, you definitely need a strong leader. You need somebody that can communicate the vision, the plan, what the mission and goals are for the network for the study. You need a clear study plan and a clear description of everybody's roles and responsibilities. You can pool your knowledge, expertise, and skills for a common purpose and then make sure that that's communicated. You can utilize what they call the 3 C's. So you communicate, cooperate, and coordinate. And then you definitely want a very good communication plan. Those are our 3 overview. But we wanted everybody to talk about kind of where your research is and what area you work in and then what's worked for you. So I know Marty's worked in any schools. You've worked in the community and then institution setting, and then pediatrics and coordinating sites. So, you want to get that?
Yeah. So, if y'all 3 could just sit up here. spot.
At least you're downloading that.
And just take a few minutes to talk about who you are and what kind of research you're doing, and then how you work as a network, and then maybe address some of the challenges that you all face based on what
Well, I guess I get to start with this. I'm Ari Rice. I am in school nursing, and I have been doing research with children for over 25 years. And we have been in schools and in Head Start centers, which is a lot different than I'm sure what these gentlemen we're going to talk about, because being in the community in schools is sometimes a real challenge to get into. And if any of you have tried, one of the major challenges that I have found is that personnel change all the time in schools. And you establish all these relationships, and then you find out that people have moved. But I think one of the primary things I want to say is research activities are secondary to their mission, and that is, their mission is education. So they're always very concerned about research being done in the schools because they're going to take time, they think, away from what it is that they're planning to do. So you really need to, it's very a close collaboration. And it's a different kind of network. The Head Start particularly, as you know, is a national program. They know each other. So the directors of the various programs know each other. They can help you get into other centers. So it's very important, I think, that you think about what it is that you want from the Head Start. So you need to know the characteristics of the school or the Head Start. So if you want, let's say, Hispanic children for your study, that's one. You really need to check out the center or the school, because not all schools have a lot of Hispanic children, or they may have a lot of Hispanic children. And that's something that you need to do before you even start your trail of establishing a relationship. And as you all know on the internet, in Alabama, you can look at AL.com, I think there's the education component of it, but they tell you how all the schools, how many children they have, what ethnicity, genders, all those kinds of things. So then after you think about what kind of school that you want to have, you also need to think about how far that school is from where you are at, because you're going to have to transport people. And the studies that I did in Talladega County, so we went from here to Talladega County all the time, which was great, because number one, I really wanted the rural experience. That was part of what I was looking at. But it was also one of the things that they didn't have a lot of studies going on, and I think that's something else, that if you have the opportunity to go to a place that doesn't have a lot of studies, you probably will be much more successful. So that was another reason that we went to Talladega County, and we also went to Talladega County for Head Start, because we wanted rural versus urban. We're also in Jefferson. I have been involved with Talladega County and Head Start in schools for 18 years. And it is a relationship that you have to continually work at. And part of what I think about is what I can give them being the providers. How can I get them involved? So it's not only a matter of finding out what works for them in terms of your research, but what can you do? And one of the things that we're studying is blood pressure in 3 to 5 year olds. And what we do is we take stack blood pressure. Let me tell you, I have never been so amazed at some of the blood pressure that I have. I mean, we literally have said, you need to go to the emergency room. Because, I mean, 200 over 100 is not unusual. And these people are walking around. No. So, I mean, there are things that you can give back. We do inserts on different topics, whatever they may be interested in. So it's always something that's kind of a give and take time frame. But again, you need to know what it is they want. So they have strategic plans as we all do, and you need to look at what their strategic plans are, because part of it is it usually helps. So you can gear your research to their strategic plans. And they always want to, they want to get involved. But it's not come in, do the research and leave.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'm David Kinrell, I'm pediatric infectious diseases here at UAB. I've been here for I guess 21 years now. And I've had the opportunity to work with a group that Penny Jester's been involved with now for many years as well, called the Collaborative Antiviral Study Group. It was initially started back in the early 70s by Rich Whitley, who's still here, and then his mentor before him, Charlie Alford, who was the initial division director for the Pediatric Infectious Disease Division, starting back in the 1960s. And so way back then, Charlie and then Rich as well had this vision that we were interested in and continue to be interested in rare diseases, so things that don't happen often. So if you think about it, if you're going to do a study, some sort of, especially a clinical trial that has a therapeutic intervention, and it's a rare disease, if you do it at one site, you're pretty well guaranteed failure because you're going to get about 4 patients over the course of 2 or 3 years at that one site. So the idea was, let's go across sites. Let's bring in people with shared interests and do this in a collaborative or a networked kind of a fashion. And it worked beautifully. In fact, really, if you look back at it, to my knowledge anyway, it was the first, at least within infectious diseases, the first kind of structure that really ultimately was fine-tuned and implemented fully with HIV. And it sort of set the framework for which the AIDS trials networks really have continued to do exceedingly well with a whole lot of resources. We don't have that volume of resources. But what we do have is relationships. And it's interesting, I hear what you're saying about sort of the relationship with, in your case, the site where you're doing research. For us, it's the same. It's relationships with those study sites where we're going to be taking the research, usually that we generate the protocols for, although there can be a lot of opportunity for input from the study sites and centers with that as well. But to make sure that they get what they need, that they're sufficiently invested in it and interested in it, and that they get credit for it. They get one thing that is an issue, and I don't know how this works with school-based things, but they need money. I mean, their department chairs are saying, why are you doing this if you're not at least covering your costs? It wasn't that way back in the 90s. In the 90s, things were very different. The 2000s was the evolution to the current model we have now, which is really tracking the dollar to a very great extent. So you've got to understand that's the issue. For us, the kind of canary in the coal mine with that was the California sites that we had. They faced the budgetary changes in the changing environment long before we did over in the Southeast, or even the Midwest or other states around in the Northeast or in the West. And so we began to understand that this was an issue. We couldn't really do anything about it, but with subsequent funding cycles, we built in salary support, for instance. We have regularly scheduled calls. Penny led 2 calls this morning with 2 of our studies and the study sites for just basically keeping our awareness in front of them. It's especially important. It's probably important with any study, but it's especially important with a rare disease study because they might go for months at a time with not enrolling anybody. And so they need to have that sort of constant, we need to be on the radar. And the best way to do that, again, is to maintain the relationship. Going across study centers and therefore across academic medical centers for pediatric infectious disease, we don't really have people in private practice in what I do. You've got to not only understand the lay of the land with what standards they're being held to, in other words, salary support, and make sure that costs are covered. But you also need to understand the way that their business offices work. You need to make sure that they're invoicing you at timely intervals. You need to make sure that their office of sponsored programs is responsive. anybody from OSP in here?
No, I don't think so.
You need to make sure our OSP is responsible. IRBs, it is the proverbial village that makes this happen. And many of the people in that village that make this happen are sitting in this audience right now. It is not one person that does this. Penny drives it. She directs things, but it's the expertise that we are so fortunate to have in our office that make all of this happen. And it's a specialized, it's like the slide you had, it's a specialized, each person has their own differentiation, their area of expertise. And then they're all physically located next to one another, and Penny and I are in the same area as well. And so it allows this opportunity for me to yell out, hey, Susan, what do you think about such and such? And she can yell back to me what I need to know. It's that kind of a relational aspect as well within the walls of, in our case, UAB, that really makes it happen, that plus just the incredible people. So it's like, when you read the business books, you look for the right people to sit in the right place on the bus, and we're fortunate to have done that over the years, and we've had some great success, and we've had the opportunity to work with some great centers who have had also the same kind of thing at their site. I'll say that the institutional impediments to crossing boundaries between institutions can be challenging. It's not always going to be easy. But it again comes back to what you were saying. What's in it for them? What helps them make the argument within their institution? And then how do you work with them? And mostly, honestly, it's grants and contracts nowadays. It's not, the IRB's gotten much better. The IRBs really don't slow us down. It's grants and contracts. How do you, I don't know how to work with the lawyers. I don't, that's still a black box for me. But it's a necessary black box, so we'll figure it out. And then once that's resolved, there'll be some other impediment that comes up. That's okay. Because in my case, the reason we do it is to help children. And what more is there than that? So as long as we're working toward the right goal, we can, and we're working together, and we're having fun, then all's going to be okay.
So, I'm Turner Robertson from Adult Infectious Diseases, and I lead our HIV clinical trials network. And so, in the 80s, obviously, HIV appeared on the scene as a devastating epidemic, and we had no treatment. So the NIH put aside money to develop treatments for HIV. And similar to what David said, it's not the kind of disease you could do at one single location. You had to have multiple centers. And so over time has evolved this trials network that involves multiple different networks, different aspects of HIV disease. And so we participate, or we contribute to 4 different trials networks under the rubric of the NIAID AIDS, HIV/AIDS networks. So first we're an AIDS clinical trials unit, which is really looking at people who are infected with HIV and looking at novel treatments, and now focusing actually on the cure of HIV, which seems phenomenal or unbelievable, but truly we're developing research along that pathway. The second one is a vaccine trials network, so obviously we're looking at trying to develop a prophylactic vaccine to prevent HIV infection. And then 2 other prevention networks. One is called the Microbicide Trials Network, which is looking at using medications as microbicides to prevent transmission from one person to another one. And the last one is the Prevention Trials Network. And so this network is more kind of a mishmash of different prevention approaches, trying to address different parts of the HIV epidemic. For instance, trying to identify people who are infected but unaware of their status, and so getting them engaged in care, looking at treatment as prevention, looking at stuff, using antiretroviral therapy as prevention. So a lot of different ways to prevent transmission. So a lot of different pieces to that, and we have all those under one rubric, up the street in the clinical care building. So I think that when you look at we've had tremendous success because of good leadership and committed people. I think there are 3 things that have made our unit and many units across the U.S. successful. And first is having, people who are passionate and committed, and first and foremost are the investigators. And I think it's become really important now to have engaged investigators. Maybe I'll come back to that in just a second. The second thing is having the patient population that you're going to study. So I do clinical research, so that requires patients. And so there are places where people may be interested in HIV, but they don't have enough patients to do that. So here in the Southeast, obviously, the epidemic is still raging at the greatest, so it's critical that we have that. But I think that and it's still necessary to have these big research networks in multiple sites, because even though we may have 3,200 patients that we follow at our clinic up the street, that's not nearly enough to be able to find enough people to answer specific questions. And then the third thing is adaptability. So, there's continuing change to the field, whatever field you're in. As soon as we come up with a treatment for a disease, now we've got to worry about the toxicity or resistance or other things. So we need to be adaptable and responsive as the field changes. And I'll give you one example. For many years, people have been a little bit ambivalent in the infectious disease arena for hepatitis C because we had very limited treatment. And just in the last 5 years, treatment for Hep C has been sort of revolutionized. And it's more than the hepatologists can handle. And so infectious disease doctors are using our expertise in HIV therapies to apply that to Hep C. And so, we have to respond to the time. I think one of the critical things is really having the investment of people, and particularly investigators who are interested. We do a lot of collaborative science. So we have people, we have protocols that may be at 30 different sites across the U.S. I'm currently on a protocol that has 90 sites across the globe. So just thinking about that, you really, you need to have committed investigators at your site who recognize the importance of the science, because our mission at the clinic is to provide care. For HIV, there's a lot of synergy between research and clinical care, because the research we do is to improve treatments for the disease. And early on, it was particularly critical because there were no treatments. But as we've developed medicines, there's less of an urgency to develop new treatments. So it's really critical that we have engaged investigators who can then take that to the patients and say, this is important, this is a big question. For instance, we're doing studies right now on cardiovascular disease, which is a little less tangible than treating the virus. And need to be able to explain that to patients why we're doing these studies and what the rationale is. And so committed in the sense that they are taking the study to the patients and engaging them, but also taking ideas that we have, that we identify problems in the clinic, and taking those, which we may not be able to answer with just our clinic, and taking those back to the network at large and developing protocols and answering critical questions as well. Like I said, the field is evolving, and I think that the nice thing about our network is it brings together clinical research and translational basic science folks who are understanding mechanisms of disease, and the two kind of really fertilize each other and allows us to test novel paradigms to treat HIV, to develop a cure for HIV. One of the challenges we constantly face is we may need more sophisticated or different assays. We may need to find people within our university we can collaborate with. We're no longer just giving medicines and assessing levels in the blood. We may need to do surrogate markers for cardiovascular disease. We may need to get immunology expertise. We may need to get GI expertise to do biopsies for us. So reaching out within the university is also critical, and finding like-minded people who are interested in this type of work. So I think that having engaged investigators is really critical to our success. The other thing that's really critical is having people who are also engaged and passionate and willing to do it, because, like David said, I'm terrible with IRB stuff. So, I mean, if I have to do IRB stuff, we would never get out of the IRB because I failed to cross every T. So having, the people who also serve those roles and are very good at what they do. Recognize that it's really a team approach we have to have. So we have these 4 networks. We have, I don't know how many different investigators involved, but we have, I think, 12 research coordinators who are nurses. We have about 9 data managers, and then we have 3 people who do IRB, and then we also have 3 kind of lead coordinators. So it's a very involved process. The really great thing about it, besides it's fun to work with people on a together towards a goal that you can't achieve on your own. It also allows us to collaborate both within the university. It gives us the infrastructure. So if we have someone here at UAB wants to do a trial, we can work with them. So for instance, through Suzanne, I recently met somebody in the School of Public Health, Paul Muntner, who's very interested in ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. And we're applying much of this to HIV, and it's very exciting, it's interesting, and it brings together my interest in cardiometabolic complications of HIV and Suzanne's interest in hypertension, and it brings synergy to helping us understand the mechanisms and develop better treatments for patients. So I think that once again, I think it's challenging. I'm always pulling my hair out about something. We had an enrollment violation this week, and dealing with those kind of things. I think you have to stay proactive. Communication is critical on every level, both communication locally. So we have our teams. We have these distinct teams who meet at least twice monthly. And then we come together and meet once monthly. And then on top of that, like David said, we have conference calls constantly, which it gets to be aggravating at times, but it really is all part of the process, and it's pretty amazing then when you present data that actually has an impact on the care of patients. So anyway, I guess I'll stop there, and I'm happy to discuss our networks as well.
Any questions? Does anybody have any networks that they're working on or working toward building?
I do have a question. We're kind of starting up doing a series of clinical trials. We've been more NIH grants, and a PI comes in with this grant, we execute it, and we get through our study. And we are now starting with the clinical trials, and we're doing more than one at a time. And we find when we're doing our study startup and feasibility, it's all great. We walk into the clinic, get ready to start, and all of a sudden the clinic can't be bothered. They've got too many patients. The doctors who said, "Oh yeah, we're free all day on Thursdays," we show up with the patient, "Oh, I'm in surgery all day today." And so we're having a hard time getting that buy-in from the staff that works in the clinic. The research team is all on board, and we know our parts, but when we try and implement it, which is usually in the clinic takes priority over the research, but yet we've got a patient there that we all have to take care of. How do you deal with those kind of issues, research versus clinic?
Yeah, I can address that a little bit. I think it's a big challenge. We have the same challenge. So we try to engage with the providers and let them know the research that's ongoing and why we're doing it. And if they have patients who qualify, we try to approach them about it. But it's a constant challenge. So for instance, we're doing a study right now where we're giving people a statin who don't qualify for a statin otherwise. And, we have the most success when the provider advocates on our behalf. But it can be hard to do that. We go to them once a quarter and update them on all the studies that we have ongoing. So it can be a little bit overwhelming. So we have interventional studies, we have behavioral studies, we have studies where we're just collecting specimens. I think that sometimes it gets to be a little overwhelming. So I think it's incumbent on whoever your lead investigator, PI is, he or she has got to be the advocate and go talk to the providers directly. It really comes down to that level of communication. And you have to keep going back. If you have a study, we find this quite often. We'll go inundate people with about the study, And so for 2 to 4 weeks, we'll have a bump, and then people go back to whatever their behavior was before. So you have to continue to press on it. I think this is a big issue in recruitment. We often I think we overestimate how well we're going to do. And we want to look good when we're turning in our feasibility surveys. And then when we get to the other side, there are a lot of challenges, or maybe the inclusion criteria are a little bit more difficult than we thought. And so I think that A, need to be realistic up front, but B, on the back end, then really stay vigilant about engaging people. And so so I've had this happen where I've accepted a study which I wasn't really excited about, and it ends up languishing. So I find if I don't find the science or the study to be of interest, then we turn it down, because if you don't have an investigator who's really engaged, you're not going to have success. So.
Yeah, we're based at Children's, and so, at least y'all are kind of under one institutional umbrella. We're not. DOP is Department of Pediatrics is UAB, and Children's Hospital is running its clinical enterprise. So in some ways it may mimic the kind of thing you're talking about. It reminds me of what you said about schools. You got to know what their mission is. Well, in the clinic, their mission is to see patients and see as many as they can, because that's how they get rewarded, and they get dinged if they don't. So what we do, I don't know how successful you'd say we've been. I think we've had moderate success to good success and a couple of failures. We look at when we're doing things in the emergency room, for instance, influenza studies or RSV studies in the wintertime. Think about an pediatric emergency room in the middle of winter with respiratory viral season. I mean, it's chaotic, and they are just trying to see as many patients as they can, and we got to be very much aware of what their workflow is. We try to understand that, and then, first of all, we make sure they're interested, that they have some degree of interest, and they'll always say yes. And then, because they don't want to they don't want to look bad. But then you go to the people that really are doing the work, and that's not the doctors. That's the nursing staff and the folks putting people in the room and cleaning the rooms, and you say, you get a sense for their workflow, and then you figure out how you could be in their space but not in their way. For us, we found one little place where we could set up a table in the hallway. But it was not where the gurneys would come past, because then they'd smash into our table, and that would be good for anybody. And so we tried to find ways to again be around them, figure out when we could dash in and get out without slowing them down, because we don't want them looking and figuring out what to do. It's not good for the patients either. So that was our approach. And then the other thing that we do, and it's not quite responsive to your question, but it's another thing that we spend a lot of time thinking about. When you're trying to find the patients in the first place, it may be the clinic's the right place to go. But let's say it's a study about MRSA, and you're in surgery clinic and they're draining a bunch of abscesses. That may not be the best place to find those patients. It may be better to go. So think about where the narrowest part of the funnel is, and go there. So for us, a lot of times it's the diagnostic labs. It's micro, or it's the molecular diagnostic lab, to figure out. We have an RSV study that we're hoping to be part of a treatment study coming up. How do we find those patients that are admitted? Well, we can go and we can search for who has RSV when they come in, or we can search for a diagnosis of bronchiolitis. Not be down in the space of the emergency room looking for the bronchiolytics, but figuring out how to do it a little, as remotely as we can, but where we have the greatest chance of finding them. Then we got to hit the floors and find the doctors and say, is it okay if we approach your patients? That kind of thing.
I think the gatekeepers, finding out who the gatekeepers are, and like you said, David, they're not always the people that you think. Like the principal, a lot of times it's the secretary in the office, and you really want to get in and you get to know those people.
And donuts help.
Yeah.
And we all like to be valued, and they're incredibly valuable folks.
Yeah, it is. If you can keep up with more than just the people you would think, it's finding out where the line of communication is. It's like the scheduler may know more about what's going on sometimes than the physician would know. I mean,
You're always number one.
Yeah. So those might be the people that you would need to talk with. When do these people come in? You know, when are the people that you're really trying to enroll? When are they?
Yeah, using informatics, so I just can't necessarily do that in the schools, but in the clinic setting, we use our informatics to sort of pre-identify people who might qualify for studies. So we're not overwhelming a provider saying, will you look over your list and see if any of your 14 people qualify for this study? We say, patient X, Y, and Z today qualifies, and we talk to them. So we do the work for them and make it a little bit easier for the providers as well.
That's what, we try and do that too, because we realize any added burden is going to be a problem, you know, when you're seeing 70 patients. We don't think it's a big deal. Oh, can you tell us? Well, it is a big deal when you've got 70 people. So we try and, you know, do as much as we can, but we find it hard to kind of get everybody. It's the clinic of, we've got like 8 physicians in the group with their staff, and they don't have regular meetings, so we can't go and present everything all at one time. So we're kind of piecemealing these, getting information out, or we'll try and post something like in their mailboxes, and 4 of them say, don't put anything in my mailbox, I got too much to do. And the other 4 say, hey, that was great, thanks for the information. So we're trying not to cause any conflict either in a clinic where we aren't employees.
Yeah.
So we're walking this tightrope all the time of trying to make everybody.
Is there any way to pull them out of clinic and see them in some place that's in close proximity that is only research focused?
I mean, unless we hit them up during their lunch, which I don't think they want to.
No, I'm talking about the patients that would be research subjects.
What we try and do is, we do have a whole research facility off the clinic where we can talk to patients. But we have found that if you pull them out before they've seen the doctor, that's never a good thing.
Yeah.
And then if they've waited more than an hour or 2 for that doctor, they don't want to talk to anybody but go home. So we're trying to figure out any nuances y'all might know of to kind of get in there without interrupting the patient or the physicians and their staff.
I mean, we do, well, so one thing you can do, I would agree with what David said, if you can pay lunch for the staff and then tell them about the studies, maybe go once a quarter and tell them, you don't do it too frequently, but that actually can be helpful so it's on their radar. And then we actually have, a person in our research group who is a screener, and he or she is in the clinic every day. And so if a person, you know, there's a lot of downtime in the doctor's office. So they may hop in between and talk to the patient, and that often is quite useful. The patients aren't so angry when we finally get in because we're running, 40 minutes behind. They actually have somebody to talk to. Then there's also that opportunity for them to take advantage. So I don't know if you can do that, but I think there's a lot of downtime when patients get put in the room, and we use that. And our research technicians are kind of taught that, if the providers end up coming in, they just step out immediately. But I think for us in our clinic, it's kind of a culture. We see research and clinical care is working synergistically, and so the leadership of the clinic is bought in. So it might be also useful to talk to whoever the clinic director is, if he or she is interested in research and really trying to get them to advocate.
You guys are unique in that way. I mean, HIV has always been research in clinical care side by side. So you're very fortunate to have that kind of and it's been built, you built it carefully over time.
Yeah.
I guess I'm hearing 2 different things. I'm hearing how do we get access via the staff in the clinic and the physicians working in the clinic. And then I'm also hearing how do we get access with the patients and not inconvenience them or slow them down. So if you think about it more broadly, with the great ideas for this side, and then if you can, without coercing them, but money helps, so if there's a way to pay a research subject, recognizing they've been sitting in clinic for 3 hours and you're asking for 20 more minutes of their time, that's important. And I think our IRB is relatively realistic about they have, obviously constraints about amount of money and that kind of thing, but those making the patient feel valued if they become a research subject is important also. and kind of broad level generic stuff.
And so I know we have a number of women's studies we do, and for some of those visits, we just give them a gift pack of soaps or shampoo or lotion. And once again, the patients feel valued by receiving a gift for taking the time out to do a 10-minute survey with us.
With our babies, we give them Pampers. You know, I mean, there's think what would be helpful for them, that kind of thing.
So it doesn't always have to be financial
That's true.
compensation.
That's true.
Any other questions? Thoughts? Concerns?
I have a comment. David mentioned, finding the narrow funnel. And when you're doing that feasibility, something that, because I'm not familiar often with the setting from which I'm going to be screening these people from, I try to figure out what the flow is. I've made the mistake when I started of not informing someone who was at the tippy top, realizing I'm in their house and they don't know who the whatever I am.
Mhm.
I've never done that again. I find who's at the tippy top, medical director, nursing manager, just so that they know who I am. And then I try to find, is there like a nursing educator? Is there like one or two people who are kind of like, not the tippy top people that are really busy, but the people that it's kind of an umbrella. Everybody, they can kind of like talk to those people, and they're kind of my advocates. And then, of course, you bribe them, you drink chocolate, you bring donuts, you're in their face, but not in their space. That's kind of my mantra, I want them to know who I am, and, pardon my French, but then I know my shit. When I come in there, I'm not like going, I know exactly what I'm doing, I know their flow, they look at me and they're like, okay, he's out, time for you to go in. And then if there's other like residents or anybody else, PT student, whatever, if they come in and this is not usual, I'm the guest. So when they come in and they're usually deferring to me, they're like, oh, no, you do your stuff. I'm like, no, you do your stuff, I'll be back. So they know I'm a good guest, but I wouldn't have known how, in the beginning, I just got to figure out how things work. And sometimes that will tell you who might be a trouble for you, what person you really got to make friends with, And it could be somebody who's really not even involved. It could be somebody who doesn't want to be bothered by you always asking for a stapler. That kind of thing. And some people you're just never going to please. The other thing is just getting them engaged, just knowing that none of what you're doing is making anybody in their world a guinea pig. This is science. This was approved. We want to do something that would be beneficial for these kids, these grown-ups, these dogs, whatever, so that they don't look at you. It's not an us and them.
Right.
You become part of them.
Sure.
And the basic chocolate helps.
I think the other thing is to inform the patient, like David was saying, and the parent. I mean, if we have access to the parent, we go to meet the teacher night, we go to any opportunities that we have to get the parents involved and know what the study is about. So if you had any access to the patient outside of all the clinics and all the providers and all of that, they may be willing to do your study even if they have to stay extra time because it's important. But many times they don't really have a clue about what's going on. So it's kind of like, they can't make the decision, somebody else is making it for them.
Well, if nobody has anything else to say, you don't have to stay. Thank you all for coming, and thank the three of you. Here, did you have an evaluation form?
Oh, sure, no problem.
I expected maybe an email yesterday. But they never, it was a little bit delayed getting back to me with their arrangements for the first visit, so we'll see. But she's just excited.
Oh, cool.
Feel valued, so. Anyways,
All right, awesome. We need to reach out to Buddy again. How are you?
They said it's your home. I'm ready
Now he's free. Big boss.
Okay.
Yeah, we're close out here. This organization is meant to be hung by one thumb drive. And when you do that, it shows an eye higher than that.
So I was out last week. You really will. I think that's really
Yeah, when you see it first.
Will you guys see what kinds of things? But that's 30 minutes, that's all we're not going to do. I said 2, I thought.
Okay, no.
We just got to start on. I was saying here. We're just getting right